development and fit fam. So I'm going to talk about a topic that many people have requested, and that is how hard should you train for optimal muscle growth and strength development. So there's a few key points I'm going to address here when it comes to developing muscle growth and strength. The first key point is going to be training stages or training age. So there are 3 key training ages that every person who engages in strength training or fitness goes through. So there's the beginner stage, which typically lasts between 1 to 2 years, and in that phase you don't really need to train the failure as much. You don't need to do crazy high volumes because your body is like a sponge. It is completely unadapted. It is not used to this stimulus, so to speak, of strength training. So your muscles and your nervous system are receptive to the stimulus that strength training provides, and that is why beginners often make the best gains of their life in that 6 month to 1 year stage, because you're simply primed for muscle growth and simply primed for strength training, or for strength gain, sorry. Now, a key thing I would say to beginners, but it applies to any training age and training experience, is you need to focus on your form and your technique, as well as incrementally getting stronger. So those are the key things for beginners. If you, maybe like myself, the problem I run into is I developed bad habits whenever I first started training, and that did carry over. Eventually I did correct them, but you don't want to start off with bad habits as a beginner, because maybe at some point down the line it may lead to an injury if you're not training correctly with good form. Now, as an intermediate, which is typically another year to 3 years after the beginner stage, things get a wee bit more difficult, and muscle growth and strength gains begin to slow down because progress is not linear. It's often in an S curve, so it goes up and it starts to dip a wee bit. So when you're on your intermediate, the solution often is increase your volume, i.e. the reps and sets that you lift, increase your intensity, which is the weight on the bar. Now, your primary goal still should be strength progression. Trying to lift heavier weight with good form is the key to really achieving what is progressive overload. Progressive overload is, I would argue, it is the most important factor behind developing strength and muscle gains. Now, you can progress in different ways, like I talked about, higher volume, you can add reps, you can add sets, and that also allows you to progress as well. The key driver of muscle growth is mechanical tension, and we'll touch on that in a wee bit later when we go to the science behind muscle growth. Now, when you get to the advanced stage, when you're at this point, things really slow down. Now, you could make the argument whenever you reach the advanced stage, which is typically at least after 5 years up to 10 years, you're near your genetic limit for muscle growth and muscle strength. I myself am at the advanced training stage because I've trained for 10 years, and things become a lot more difficult. Your progress in the gym will naturally tend to slow down. Obviously, if you are natural, if you do decide to take steroids, that can burst past plateaus, but you must be aware that doing steroids has health consequences to it. Now, I would say this is a key point here. So, as an advanced trainee, you break the rules. Now, before I even explain what that means, as a beginner, as the saying goes, beginners learn the rules, intermediates follow the rules, and advanced trainees break the rules. What that means is, often people who are in advanced training stage, they need to really shock their body. They really need to apply novel stimulus to their body in order to achieve muscle growth and continue to make progress. Now, I'll give you an example. I squat 5 times a week. Now, would I tell a beginner to squat 5 times a week? No, they simply could not handle that frequency, that volume, that workload. I also have an increased work capacity through years of training. But whenever you get to the advanced stage, you can begin to break the rules that beginners and intermediates often have to follow. Now, wee things as well to touch on for muscle growth and bursting past plateaus. Things like drop sets, things like cluster sets are very good for the purposes of hypertrophy. Now, strength gains, if you're a powerlifter or strongman, a wee bit different. I would say if you are a powerlifter or strongman, focus on the lifts that you will be performing or the particular exercise that you will be performing in those competitions. But if you're a bodybuilder, things like drop sets, cluster sets are very good for your goals. So the next key point I'm going to touch on is what stage you're at in the training program. Now, that is very important, and it does determine how hard you should train for muscle growth and strength development. So, training stages can be defined as a mesocycle. So, that's basically the scientific term for a 4 to 8 week block of training. Now, whenever you are at the beginning of a mesocycle, you should train less hard with less volume. Now, you might turn around and say, well, that doesn't really make much sense. Surely at the start of a mesocycle, you would train your hardest, or you would, train with a bit more intensity. But it's kind of like, this is a marathon, not a sprint, and you don't want to overly tax your nervous system and your skeletal muscle system too much. Because what you'll find is if you train really hard the first 1 to 2 weeks of your mesocycle, what will happen whenever you get to the third week, which is the week you should peak, you're going to be burnt out. So train less hard with less volume in the first 1 to 2 weeks. Then your third week, your fourth week, it depends as well on the length of your mesocycle. Mesocycles typically are 4 to 8 weeks, so again, if it's an 8 week, it would be the 6th and the 7th week. But towards the end of the mesocycle, you should train harder with more volume. And then after that, you take a deload. And a deload is basically a planned phase for maybe a week or so, where you drop your volume, you drop your intensity to maybe 50% of your 1 rep max, and you allow your body to recover, you allow your nervous system to recover, and you allow your body to get rid of systemic fatigue that you've built up throughout the course of your mesocycle. Now, 2 key terms I want people to come away from with this video is 2 concepts known as RIR, reps in reserve. And what that basically means is how many reps you could have completed, if any, for a given set. So if you have an RIR 3, that means if you've done a set of squats, you could have done 3 more. So if you've done, say, 5x5 on the squat, and you turn around to me and said, listen, I probably had an RIR 3, that means you would have done 3 more reps. 2, obviously 2, 1. If you had an RIR 0, that means you've trained the failure. Now, the other concept that is pretty much closely related, but it's kind of flipped, is RP, which is your rate of perceived exertion. So I would use RIR and I would use RP with my clients to gauge how they're feeling in a given session. So if I say, if you have an RP of 6, for instance, that means you could have completed 4 additional reps. If you had an RP of 10, you're like, done, I'm fucked, can't do any more. So I suppose the key takeaway from the mesocycle is this: you want to progressively add reps and sets, or have your loads as the weeks go by. When you do that, you will often find you'll peak towards the last couple of weeks of your mesocycle, and then you take a deload. And then whenever you've recovered, you'll actually find that you're stronger whenever you go into the next mesocycle. Now, the final point I'm going to make is, ultimately, if you want to be the best, you have to push yourself and challenge yourself in the gym. Anybody who wants to achieve an elite level of strength, or achieve elite levels in their sport, you have to push yourself. You have to push the boundaries of what is possible. It may even mean sacrificing things like time with friends, time with family, even your health as well. But for the most part, your training should also reflect the specificity of what your fitness, your competitive, or your sports goals are. So, if you are a powerlifter, you should be focusing on the bench, the squat, and the deadlift, because those are your competition lifts. Now, you obviously can do variations of those in order to maybe bridge weaknesses and to strengthen your conventional lifts. If you are a bodybuilder, focus on movements that are often your best bang for buck in terms of muscle hypertrophy. You're not really concerned about getting stronger, although I will say bodybuilders can benefit from increasing their strength as well. And strongmen, obviously, things like the deadlift, the Atlas stones, things, heavy carries, overhead carries, the log press, all those things, those are specific for your sport, so you should focus on training hard for them. Now, just to recap then for everybody who's watched. 3 key things you want to take into account for how hard you should train for muscle growth and strength development, and those are your training experience, your training age, whether you're a beginner, an intermediate or an advanced, the stage you're at in your training phase or your mesocycle, and finally, what is your particular fitness, sporting or competitive goals. So like I've touched on, if you are maybe a powerlifter, focus on 3 key lifts, bodybuilder, your more hypertrophic movements, and strongman, your strongman movements. So, but ultimately, as long as you're adding reps, you're adding sets, you're trying to train as hard as you did last time, that is really all you need. So again, thanks for watching. Just to finish off, if anybody's wondering why I'm doing this video, top this is to keep people's fucking attention. So thanks for watching, appreciate it, love you all, peace.